This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Jordan Girth here with the National Weather Service Office of Observations. Thank you so much for joining us for the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. This is session number 209. I'm glad to have Tyler Stanfield, meteorologist and GIS program lead at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Slidell, Louisiana, with us today. His presentation is on hunting for tornado paths using high-resolution satellite imagery. Following Tyler's presentation, I will be facilitating the discussion. Just a few reminders, as you heard, that this session is being recorded, so please mute your microphones and turn off your webcams if you are not speaking. There will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation, and I encourage attendees to post your questions in the chat, and we'll field them in the order they are asked. If you have signed in using an office account, please specify your name when asking a question in the chat so we can follow up if necessary. We're always looking for future presenters. Please contact the Tower S team. If you would like to be a presenter, perhaps you have a presentation from the recent National Weather Association annual meeting like Tyler did, we'd love to incorporate that into the Satellite Book Club, and there's a link in the chat. If you're looking for training materials, Ross Van Til can help on that one. I'd like to thank the Office of the Chief Learning Officer and the GEO and LEO programs for their support of the Satellite Book Club. I also appreciate all of you for being with us today. And again, Kashad and Emily working behind the scenes as part of our Tower S team to put this program on without a hitch each and every week. Well, without further ado, let me talk a little bit more about Tyler Stanfield and his background. He's a meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Slidell, Louisiana, completed his bachelor's in meteorology at the University of Oklahoma in 2020, and graduated with a master's in geography at Virginia Tech in 2022. Prior to joining the NWS, his primary interests are tropical meteorology, GIS, climate teleconnections, and currently serves as the local office's GIS program lead, in addition to his contribution to the GIS program at the regional and national level. Tyler, welcome to the Satellite Book Club.
Yeah, thank you so much for your introduction. I really appreciate you guys putting this on, and definitely look forward to sharing some of the findings that we've found over the last year or so in our office locally, and just really excited to be able to, share with you guys at a higher level, all of the different things that we're working on here at the local level. So just getting into kind of the preface of what we're talking about when we're talking about hunting for tornadoes in our area, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea. So using high resolution satellite, one of the most important factors that we were kind of, the reasoning for why we wanted to look into this was that when it comes to land cover type, especially in the southern and eastern tier of the country, it's pretty heavily wooded. There's a lot of woody wetlands and evergreen forests where roads just really don't do it justice to be able to give us the ability to survey every inch of square mile of area when a tornado passes through. So we were kind of trying to find ways that we could fill in those gaps, find ways to get more context, get understanding of maybe what happened if there really was a tornado or not. And so this is a land cover type image of southern region. As you can see, a lot of green there. But if you really focus in on the Gulf Coast region in our area, you'll see a lot of woody wetlands in the light blues, and still some dark greens in there as well, where you have a lot more of the evergreen forests and such. But yeah, our biggest focus, you can see half of our area, is kind of what we kind of call as faux land or swamp or whatnot. And so we have a particular challenge in our area of tornado surveys because of the lack of road networks and just really the lack of civilization in some capacity there. So to talk specifically about some of the data sources that we used for this project, we have Landsat 8 and 9 that's been around for a long time. Sentinel-2 has also come aboard, which is a really good resource as well for 10 meter, but the real focus for this specific project was the Planet Labs constellation using 3 to 5 meter resolution data because of the fact that it has a much higher temporal resolution as well, given the fact that it's almost nearly daily imagery across much of our area. And that kind of thing for us is really important when we're talking about tornado damage, surveys, because we want to be able to get as recent of an image before and after the tornado to see where the true difference is and where the track could have been. and things of that sort. And then some supplemental stuff that we've started to play with as well as the worldview Maxar data that's available, as well as some of the Airbus imagery that's available on the Google Earth, I think Google Earth Pro. Those kind of resources are really important, especially when we talk about looking back in time as well, in the reanalysis aspect, which we'll talk about a little bit later down the road. So how can we exactly use this stuff, and what have we been using it for particularly? So our main kind of focuses with the imagery itself have been through the true color imagery, and then converting that true color imagery into your NDVI difference map. So your NDVI, which is basically kind of talking about the tree health and greenery, basically what, to layman's terms, it's the greenery of the vegetation and whether that kind of stuff is changing between images. And by doing so, you can see on this image itself, which we'll talk more in the cases and stuff later on, but you'll see that NDVI differencing can really highlight where the biggest changes have occurred between images, and help us kind of find where those tornado damage paths are. And then we get into the Maxar and highest resolution stuff that we have available, and you can see, and this is Google Earth Pro, tornado damage path here, which just shows a really strong convergent flow of tree fall. And so that's associated with an EF3 tornado in our area back in 2019. But the biggest things that we really take away from this is that it enables us to have a more accurate tornado database. It's also assisting in finalizing that information into storm data more efficiently, and also assisting in warning verification, especially for our area where we may not get reports because of it being fairly rural, especially out in the swamps and such. So being able to verify those warnings is just as important for us as well. So what exactly is NDVI difference mapping on a more scientific level? NDVI is calculated basically by the differences in reflectance of the vegetation. So you'll see a lot of farmers actually use this kind of stuff to kind of understand vegetation health. But what we are using it for predominantly is for it to look for browning of vegetation, which is usually dying off of vegetation due to damaged vegetation. And so we can calculate that by looking at the after image of the tornado after the tornado happens, where things have started to die off and they're starting to brown, versus minus the before image, which is when everything was still pretty green. And you can see the results then show off where the strongest difference is, where that tornado damage path is going to be. This was over the Pearl River Basin, and so that's an area that we definitely could not have reached beforehand. But by doing so, this kind of stuff is really helping us to, it saves us a little bit of time as well. A lot of true color imagery, I can attest myself. There's a lot of eye strain that comes along with analyzing just the true color imagery itself, especially when it's weaker tornadoes that don't have a very strong path. So something like this is a really good supplemental tool to kind of help pinpoint, hey, where's the biggest differences? Where can we really hone in and see where the strongest differences in this path are, and then go from there with the true color imagery. So let's get into some of the cases that we've looked at over the last 2 years in our area and shown kind of the utility of this. So this is a radar image of one of the tornadoes that occurred in our December 14th, 2022 tornado outbreak over our area. We even had a tornado debris signature and radar confirmed tornado from this. But when we went out to survey, obviously we had a lot of surveys that day, but when we went out to survey for this one specifically, you can kind of even note in the GR2 place files here, there's really not many roads in this area of rural St. Tammany, and as a result, the survey crew had a difficulty finding any damage. And so what was really interesting was that we had a couple of reports here and there of damage, but when we went to go survey those areas, we couldn't find any evidence of it. So by doing this analysis, this is one of our first cases that we really tried this out on. We overlaid the TDS of where on radar, looked at the exact location of where that TDS was, and then we're able to look at the NDVI difference map and then start to pick out where we saw a pretty defined but narrow and weak kind of path of damage. By doing so, it actually, you can even see it here a little bit, it did actually end up clipping this very small secluded neighborhood that we could actually revisit. We ended up revisiting it about a month or two later and finding, oh wait, there actually is a couple of small snapped pine trees in this area. So we actually were able to confirm that tornado by doing this extra analysis. So that was one of the examples that we used for this in the first instance. but even still, it's also showing where areas that we can't get to. So this specific instance was last year, June 20th, 2023, and we had a pretty sizable tornado damage scar that we found on satellite after reviewing some of our cases from last year when we were kind of cleaning up all of our database for the year and finalizing that into storm data. And this is an area of the wildlife management area out way south of New Orleans. And essentially, this area is only accessible by boat. And it was very jaw dropping, obviously, to see this. And this is something that you could actually probably even see on Google Maps. It was kind of under our nose the entire time. But by reviewing our cases, we were able to find it. And fortunately, with being able to get in contact with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, we actually had the opportunity to go out there and actually look at the damage, even though it was a little bit later than we would like to. Obviously, we want to get that out there as soon as possible, usually for a survey. But something like this, it's obviously not known in real time, usually very often. But regardless, it was really cool to be able to get out there and be able to then match up the really high resolution data that we're getting. This specific image that's the before and after is actually Airbus imagery, where we could see pretty defined areas of damage. Where you're talking about, actually, I can see the stumps. I can see big areas of uprooted trees. And so then being able to go down on the ground and get ground truth of the uproots down here and the snapped cypress trees was really, really interesting, and able to kind of getting the true comparison of what you're seeing on high resolution satellite versus what's the ground truth. And so this was a really good example of that, and fortunately was not of major consequences to life or property in that sense, since it was predominantly over a wildlife management area. But this specific case was very, very eye-opening, I think, for a lot of us in our office, just because it shows how many of these cases we probably have missed in the past. And then getting into this year was also kind of the first year that we really had the opportunity to start looking into this in a more real-time basis. We've started to collaborate with with NASA disasters team and CSDA to get access to this planet data more readily, more within that 30-day window of the tornado happening. And by doing so and creating this pilot project, we've been able to be more effective at detecting these tornadoes much earlier in the process. This was a very highly productive mesovortex within a QLCS. Actually, you can even kind of see it in this image. It was a merger with a supercell as well. So needless to say, there was a lot going on in this section of damage. And this is actually one of the images that I was referring to earlier in the presentation. But you can see here, very complex, very interesting evolution with this specific track. The strongest tornado was to the south in the EF2 into Slidell, but we actually had multiple other embedded circulations within this QLCS that were occurring nearly simultaneously, and then ended up occluding and continuing on to the northeast from there. Very, very interesting evolution, something that we're going to continue to obviously look at and maybe study moving forward. But I think that was one of the most eye-opening aspects of this whole experience, really, for me, was just being able to do all the ground surveys up front like we normally do, but then start to look back and look at the satellite imagery and start matching it up, seeing it, piecing those that puzzle together. When we thought we knew what we were expecting, out of this, especially with the radar imagery, like I was showing prior, we thought maybe there was like 3 or 4 different tornadoes that probably happened. But needless to say, we ended up finding much more than that. And so that was, I think, something that really told us a lot about, especially with QLCS tornadoes, what we may be missing on a regular basis with QLCS tornadoes. I think we all kind of inferred that we were missing stuff to some degree, but this is something that really gave us an opportunity to really get into the weeds and really look at what really we can get accomplished with this specific type of imagery. Another case also to talk about was the Atchafalaya Basin QLCS tornadoes that we had just a month later after that event. You can kind of note in this image to the right with our tornado climatology, that's from, I think, 1950 through 2021 or 22. And you can see there's a huge gap pretty much through much of the Atchafalaya Basin here on our western part of our CWA, which is, like I had noted before, a lot of woody wetlands. There's no roads. So surveying in that area is very difficult. And so with this specific event, we had a QLCS cross the Atchafalaya Basin, and we're able to actually see pretty defined scalloped paths of damage that were comparable to a lot of the other QLCS damage paths that we've seen in the past with some of our other QLCS events that we've had. So it was very, I guess in this case, very interesting to be able to match this up and also work with the Lake Charles office and actually have, for the first time in a while, actually coordinate, a track crossing our CWA border in the Atchafalaya Basin, because we were able to detect these tornadoes moving across the CWA border. And it's also of note too is that, I mean, even though we did attempt to perform a ground survey down here, we only had one road to work off of, and of course, the one road we did find damage on is aligned right with where this damage path on the NDVI differencing showed up. So that being said, it was very, very satisfying to be able to, piece this puzzle together and detect things that we definitely wouldn't have had prior, and make a more accurate database because of that. So, talking about more accurate database, this is another part of the project that we're kind of also evaluating on top of the real-time stuff that we're now starting to work on with the pilot project with the NASA disasters team. We also have the reanalysis attempt that we're working through right now, which is a first iteration is going to be from 2017 through 2023. We're working through the 2022 at the moment. We've already finished 23 and added 2 new tornadoes to our database, including the one that was over the wildlife management area that I had talked about. And we also have already found 7 new tornadoes in 2022. So this is going to be a multi-year process of going through basically evaluating all of our prior warnings, all of days that we've had severe weather damage reports, that possible tornado or wind damage reports, and tornado watches and such and so forth, so that we can kind of have a full list. You can kind of even see it in the image to the right. Is we have a case list of all these possible events that we think could have had a tornado. We review them in the high resolution satellite imagery, and then if we have conclusive evidence, whether that's a tornado debris signature or a really strong damage signature in the NDVI differencing that we can corroborate with other reports, then we'll confirm it. But otherwise, this is kind of one of those things that I think is more eye-opening in the sense that we have a lot of work to do, but it's also going to be, how do we manage this moving forward, and how does this affect our database, considering when we turn to this year and how we've evaluated it. And while we've had a lot of these events supplemented with the ground survey damage points that we put in, a lot of these have been assisted and confirmed by seeing the linear damage path in the satellite imagery. And so as a result, we have 31 tornadoes this year confirmed thus far, which is towards the higher end of our actual annual maximum. Our annual maximum is 34. So that basically tells you that we're nearing our own record for annual tornadoes this year. And that's, you can definitely associate that with being more able to detect these tornadoes on each event. So with that said, the main things that we have kind of concluded through this process with the strengths of satellite imagery definitely have an increased capability to survey and provide more detail in the damage assessment toolkit and storm data. Opportunity to improve warning verification is definitely there. We've been able to, obviously there's been an aspect where we've found missed events, but there's also been aspects where we've been able to confirm tornadoes and verify those warnings as well. So it is kind of a, there is, the pros and cons of that, but ultimately the goal is to improve our warning verification as well. And then increasing the ease of access to more high resolution data as well is one of the things that we're working on, and increasing that visibility. That's one of the things that really has been a push by Southern Region, especially over the last 6 to 12 months. So Southern Region is currently working through getting a request form solidified and established so that we have the ability for all WFOs to request this kind of data and be able to put this in their toolkit for when they're trying to finalize all of their tornado surveys. Talking about weaknesses, there is still obviously things and caveats that we'll have to consider for these kind of analyses. It's still pretty coarse to be talking about exact damage indicators. I did mention with the highest resolution stuff with that one specific swamp tornado that I was talking about in the wildlife management area that we did have some semblance of seeing some snapped trunks and uprooted trees and such and so forth. But right now, especially with the limitations with the EF scale, it's still not recommended that we use any of that as any sort of ground truth by any means. We're also still waiting. The wait times for satellite data can still get elongated. Even with Planet Labs, we're still, subject to cloud cover. We're still subject to passes and such that may not be always the most convenient. Especially if Planet Labs is not available, then you have to turn to things like Sentinel-2 and Landsat. And then land use classification. That's something that also is very important to consider. Just because in these specific cases we had forested regions and swamps with high grasslands and such, there's a lot of areas with mixed use like agriculture and flat plains and such and arid lands that may not be as advantageous for this type of analysis. Just because it just doesn't show, the change doesn't show up unless it's a pretty strong tornado. And at that point, you usually are going to find damage with a strong tornado like that, unless, like I said, unless it's in a rural area. But also, urban areas can be pretty noisy. You may have even seen that when I was looking at the track at the Slidell tornado that came through. When you're talking about multiple different like roof reflectances, roads, all that kind of like more rugged texture in the satellite, it can be kind of hard to discern. And marshes are also, like I said, there's definitely some caveats with marshes even too. I mean, water has high reflectance, so it can also make it really, really noisy, the reflectance of the water. And then just talking about remote sensing in general, the limitations with it. Time of day with shadows can be a way that you can create noise. Seasonal differences where we're talking about greening versus browning are also really important to consider when you're doing these kind of differences. And in that case, the transition seasons are highly recommended to have as close to before and after the event as possible to reduce that noise. While summer you could actually have upwards of weeks between those images, and it may not really affect much. And then obviously the more obvious one is cloud cover and smoke that can influence that kind of stuff. So with that said, I will go ahead and open up things to questions. I know that's probably a whirlwind of stuff right there, but I definitely wanted to try to get as much covered as possible. So appreciate you guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Tyler. Really appreciate that presentation. Glad to see so many people on today. Folks, if you have questions for Tyler, please enter those in the chat. We'll start the discussion shortly. While you're doing that, I want to remind you that the Satellite Book Club continues each and every week. Next week on Thursday, October 10th, we're going to have TJ Turnage, the Science and Operations Officer from the NWS Weather Forecast Office in Grand Rapids, to talk about a rare November hailstorm over lower Michigan and the use of the air mass RGB. So please tune in again next week for that. In the meantime, if you have any questions for our Tower S team, the email addresses for Kashad and Emily are there on the screen. You can also find us in Slack on the Tower S channel using the NWS internal space. So feel free to reach out to us. Now it's time for some questions. We've got one question come in from Dan Riley. How do you access the data, and is it freely available?
Right. That's a great question for sure. The accessibility of it right now is it's still a little bit limited. Right now we are testing out the pilot project, like I kind of mentioned with the NASA disasters team, for the Planet Labs constellation. The current licensing with NOAA currently is there's a 30-day latency on it, so essentially you would have to wait 30 days for that data to be available to you. Signing up for the Planet Lab stuff, I think, is also something that we're still kind of discussing at a regional and national level on the GIS front, because obviously it's good to have for the reanalysis aspect. I don't think there's any issues that I've heard of signing up for Planet Labs on a scientific side, so that you can do reanalysis and things like that for your office, like we've done. But As far as the real-time stuff, it's predominantly still kind of one of those things that's being worked through, where we're like for Southern Region specifically, we are working on a way to where offices can request all this data and get it as close to real time, basically within a week or so, whenever it's available. So that's one of the biggest, I think, focuses right now is developing that infrastructure. That's specifically for Planet Labs. I think Sentinel Hub actually is accessible. I may be able to even provide those links and stuff separately if you wanted to reach out. But those are the kind of things that we're working on. We also have for Southern Region a demonstration that we're planning to put out on how to do all this and all the resources involved as well. It's going to be coming in short order. So
Yeah, that's super. Thanks. It looks like there's like a couple other questions here that are similar that I think you covered or might be able to address in an additional handout or follow on. Brett Borchardt asks, can you please elaborate on how you have access to the Planet Labs satellite constellation data? Robert D asks, are there instructions for non-GIS guru to be able to do something similar with the NDVI mapping tool? So I assume we can figure all that out and share that around. Either you can do that directly or we can work through our book club to send some of that information out. Is that right?
absolutely, yeah. Feel free to reach out. We can definitely help address those questions more directly. The thing right now is that the Planet Labs specifically, we're planning on. I believe the Planet Labs itself, there's no restriction necessarily on an office signing up for it. It's just more of on the basis of requesting it in real time. That's the bigger question, considering the latency issues. So that's where the pilot project and other workflows for infrastructure are being worked on. But I believe even in some of my other presentations, I may have had a link on there, but it was kind of strapped for time.
Yep, I gotcha. And we'll make sure that that is shared so that others have access to it. Okay, wow, lots of interest in this topic. Hello from NWS Pittsburgh. What potential role do you see AI playing in identifying such features? It seems like there might be consistent ways to identify these signals in a non-manual way.
That's a great question. I think that was actually something that got brought up at NWA as well. There is definitely, especially when it comes to reanalysis, this would be a really, really good idea, I think, to be able to train AI on identifying specific types of characteristics with NDVI differencing. I think that's something that could absolutely be looked at as a way to expedite some of this process for sure.
Thank you. And now going to NWS Duluth, Joe Moore is asking, how much time are you putting into surveying an EFU in a wetlands area? Are you just downloading data, or are you downloading the data or just using the web viewers for Sentinel and Planet?
So when it comes to like these swamp tornadoes, typically, unless we have other areas of interest that we're also requesting for, we'll typically wait until after the 30-day latency. If we have no reports and if there's no way to survey it, we're gonna wait. When it comes to, like I said, if there's other tornadoes that are also within that same area, we're gonna go ahead and request it anyway. But yeah, as far as the EFUs go, I mean, yeah, we're not like it's not like a top priority when it comes to the operational side, at least.
Gotcha. And continuing with the question from Joe Moore here, he said, are there any efforts in Southern Region to coordinate the post-event satellite analysis and mutual aid capacity? The amount of time it takes to learn and improve at this will vary. Wouldn't it be nice to have mutual aid groups so any office could ask for help from those with experience in this? Or do you have any ideas about that kind of scenario?
Yeah, so mutual aid is actually something that we are working toward with the infrastructure itself. When the request form goes live um, for this specific type of data, we are going to be keyed into it. There's a kind of tight knit group of folks that are have been working with this data that can help support it. And some of those folks are the folks that are listed in the contact information there. And as far as the time it takes, it's definitely something that we're working toward reducing that time that it takes to process it as well. That's what we're working on with the pilot project. I think that's probably why it really hasn't gotten to be fully operational yet is like out everywhere, is that we're actually working with them to find ways to get a more hard coded way to request and process the NDVI differencing all at once, and then basically all we would have to do is add it into the damage assessment toolkit, and any office basically that requested it is going to get it pretty much all at once, and there's not really a middleman. There's not much of a mutual aid that actually has to happen, because we'll be able to process it. And then obviously, if you have questions about specific things that the NDVI differencing or satellite shows, then absolutely we can definitely help discern things and analyze things.
Super. Joe says thanks. Dan says thanks for your early question. I think you were talking about a demonstration earlier. Studi Deshpande asks, great presentation. Where will the demonstration be?
That's something. So we're gonna have it recorded as well. So that's something that maybe even gets published outward beyond Southern Region. As of right now, it was a Southern Region initiative, but it's something that absolutely I would not hesitate to share outside of Southern Region. It's something that we're gonna have as a demonstration for I think a lot of the Southern Region SUs and WCMs initially, but again, it's going to be recorded. So again, no hesitation to reach out and share that kind of stuff for sure. Once I think we'll be having that demonstration. The announcement for it should be coming out in the next month or so.
Cool, cool. You guys are really leading the way with this. We got something from NWS Indy. We had an outside party that had signed up for Planet Labs or Eagle Eye. The next day had 10 centimeter imagery available. It's a huge benefit to be able to have that detail because we could see shingles on roofs pulled up. Has there been any discussions at a higher up level to get access to this data? It would save a huge amount of time and overtime if we had the ability to overlay that type of satellite data over the damage assessment tool tracks. You have any thoughts on that, Tyler? And then I can also weigh in a little bit.
Yeah, I'll probably not wait. I'll let you take the lead on some of that, but I would definitely say as far as like the accessibility and stuff, I think that's something that we're absolutely starting to push forward. It's going to be kind of we're starting to move along on the runway, I think, but we're not quite ready to take off and get everything to everybody yet. But it's definitely in the works. I think our goal is to have as many of those kind of resources as we can. Obviously, the licensing permitting. So
Yeah, and I think this is really this project is really taking off. This capability, obviously, Tyler, you're proving it in real time here, and I think from my perspective at headquarters, we've had some discussions about how we can make more data available in real time, and how to make this a more effective use of our efforts, because obviously it's the reanalysis project you're doing is fantastic. We'd like to get a little bit more of this, I think, in real time to make sure it gets incorporated into storm data and whatnot. NWS Indy also asked, the Planet Labs satellite has that ability to request the high-res passes where you could request the 10 centimeters. That's something that only the pilot project folks can do. Are you able to do that, Tyler?
we haven't specifically requested the 10 centimeter data itself. That's been something that we've predominantly just focused on the stuff that's going to be available as soon as possible, the daily passes and such, because that's more operationally applicable. The 10 centimeter and really high res requests like you get from Worldview, some people probably have maybe even worked with the CMT tool before to request that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is a little bit harder to get on a regular basis within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So that's not necessarily been the most applicable, especially when you're trying to get all that information out on a PNS and all that, all of your tornado information out. So that's been something that we've been kind of back and forth on, is like, what's the top priority? But it's absolutely possible. We haven't necessarily discussed it on the pilot project side of things, but it's something that we could actually, yeah, we definitely could, at least discuss more.
Yeah, and I'll just say for folks in the field that are working on this at the regions, please make sure you're continuing to communicate how you're doing business always one level up, because I do think we do have requirements for this type of imagery at headquarters, but I think that these higher resolution data have become more ubiquitous now. And I think that the Weather Service headquarters level, we do need to adjust and take a look at commercial data buys or other sources, other vehicles to get this data to the field and in a timely sense. I'd also say that I know, Tyler, you might have had this experience as well, but particularly with Planet Labs data and the current 30-day embargo, that I know that sometimes there's hobbyists out there that are able to post things on social media that we may not have had immediate access to through our current data agreements. Have you had to deal with anything like that, and how have you handled it?
Yeah, that is a very valid point. I think, especially as we these kind of data sources have become more and more popularized. We've even seen it in the last tornado season, peak season back in May, where folks were, college students are, getting access to planet data, and suddenly they're like, wait, why don't you have access to this data? Why am I seeing it and you're not? And that's obviously very frustrating in that sense. But when we talk about like being able to handle it, obviously we have to, message that, we are still performing the priority number one is still going to be ground surveying and getting access to what we can in real time. That's, I don't think high resolution satellites going to be able to do away with ground surveys by any means anytime soon. But that said, we have to basically kind of like be patient and basically kind of reassure them, yes, we're going to be able to look at all those data sources when we get the opportunity to. And obviously for us, it's been a little bit more advantageous that we do have access to it with the pilot project. But when it comes to other offices, I would just, implore that, we are, going to hopefully get that access to other folks and more folks in the next year or two, as we continue to prioritize this and elevate this as a priority. So as far as, it definitely is an unfortunate circumstance in the moment. I think it's just kind of growing pains that we're going through right now to kind of get to where we need to get. But as far as things go for high res satellites, we are definitely, I think the other aspect, I'll pivot a little bit. The other aspect that I want to hopefully hopefully address down the road is that I think a lot of amateurs are getting access to this data and then also interpreting it maybe overestimating because like I think there's a lot more damage scars and ground scouring and other things that are happening on a regular basis that people just didn't realize before, and so they immediately assume, like the one scar that I showed earlier in the presentation, even like I can show here, this tornado had a really really impressive damage scar, but that's also over grasslands, and things like that. So I think people are maybe misconstruing some of the severity of some of this as well. So having folks that are more in tune and an ability to read this data as well, I think is going to be a part of the process for us as well in the agency, to educate the agency and get everybody on board with how to use this data too.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's a good reminder as we look at this imagery. Getting the tornado paths right is one thing, getting the EF scale right is another thing, and it's a good reminder for amateurs and hobbyists, but also folks in the field office that might not be as used to this image, to really resist trying to jump to any conclusions about what you're going to find on the ground, or interpreting imagery, not so much the 10-centimeter imagery, which you can see a little more, but imagery that's a little more coarse, jumping to any conclusion about what the EF rating might be or what damage is actually present there. We're wrapping up on time here, but another implication of all of this is as you found, the increasing number of tornado damage path detections and the impact of that on our historical database. Of course, the tornado database has always been, I think many would agree, a work in progress, but this is going to add another layer of additional detections, additional paths in the database. It's likely going to increase the overall totals. How how do you think the best way, how do we address this? And how do you think the best way is to communicate this instead of saying, well, we've had a record number of tornadoes in southern Louisiana this year?
Exactly. That's one of the things I think we've been facing, even in our own local office, is that, like, for example, the event that I had shown back here, April 10th this year, that event now is technically our most active tornado day on record, and so it's obviously a little bit. It feels a little bit. You may feel even like a little bit gross about, like, "Oh, wait, am I really like just like completely distorting the record here?" But at the same time, that's why it's important to do the reanalysis, go back and kind of set a more standardized way of evaluating these paths. And I think that that's the challenge here, is that it is going to be a long, process of doing this on a more regionalized and nationalized effort. And that's going to be, I think, part of a work in progress as well, is we have to figure out what's the real inflation adjusted type of detection that satellite is going to invoke into this database. How many more tornadoes are we detecting because of satellite data? How many more? And I think that's also, I mean, it feels like it's almost every single time that we've upgraded or added things to our detection abilities. Even talking about the invention of the addition of dual pole. And so what I think is probably the most easy way to standardize this in the long term, like I said, it's going to take a while, but in the long term, I think in a perfect world, it'd be great to be able to look at how we can reanalyze a large portion of the CONUS using this data, and also look at kind of creating it in co-location with the addition of dual pole, since we do have a lot of that data back to 2014, 2015. A lot of these data sources could be used even back to that far back, so we could actually be looking at ways to look back and kind of compare. For example, our most active events prior to this year was the February 23rd 2016 outbreak down here. So even just for the basis of historical records, I'm going back to look at that event before this year's over, just so I can make sure that, hey, is there any other tornadoes that we're missing that maybe, could have pushed that event back to the record, being the record holder again, and that kind of stuff. So just kind of covering your basis, at least in the short term, is one way you can do it. Is just like, is this event really, really that high end, or are there other events that we also had high end that were more high end than even what we documented? That's one way to fix it, but obviously in the long term, it'd be perfect to be able to kind of look back, use the reanalysis, and create an understanding of where the trend line is and how much more we're adding to the tornado database on an annual basis because of satellite detection.
Yeah, super. Thank you for that perspective. And then I'll get one last question in here, and that is really about, talked a lot about tornadoes today. Of course, tornadoes aren't the only thing that cause damage. We're looking at, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. There's also been thunderstorms that have damaging winds, derechos, hailstorms. Do you foresee using this capability for those kinds of disasters as well?
So interestingly enough, when we talk about high res satellite, I think somebody even brought that up when I was showcasing this back at NWA. But we do have abilities to look at how we have looked at in the reanalysis aspect of this. We have found where there's been pretty notable swaths of wind damage. You can even see it in this specific example that I was kind of scrolling back to. You can see the scallop paths. I'm not sure if my cursor is showing up, but I don't think it is. But the scalloped paths here, you can see on the southern flank of those scalloped damage paths in the Atchafalaya Basin, there is quite a bit of darkening and other areas that basically are denoting where you're getting strong RIJ or RFD type of straight line wind damage to the south of the circulation. And you can even see it as on the farthest east scallop, as that one starts to occlude and lift to the north, there's actually some more straight line kind of divergent flow type of damaging wind patterns that you can see in NDVI differencing. So that's for damaging winds. You absolutely could see some value with this data as well. As far as hailstorms, I've never really played with that aspect. I know for the plains, considering you get some pretty notable swaths of hail accumulation at times, that's absolutely possible. You probably could utilize it for that if you have enough real-time satellite and could convert any kind of GOES imagery into um, into a like NDVI or something like that. I've never, like I said, I've never experimented with that per se, but I'm sure there is ways in which you could approach that and glean some information out of it.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll wrap up here. But before we do, there were some even more comments in the chat, I think coming in from Steve Nelson down in Atlanta, kind of seconding the point it'd be good to expand the mutual aid teams like GIS and SAVI teams that could review satellite data from another WFO event. He says he's overwhelmed trying to summarize inland impacts from Helene to meet the strict 15-day report out requirement. So this has been eye-opening from somebody at headquarters. I think other field offices, it's touching on a need that we can and should address. So I appreciate everything you're doing and everything that's going on in Southern Region. I know you've got the team members there, and there's been other folks that we've heard from in Southern Region. So we're very thankful, and I'm looking forward to continuing to watch this progress. So Tyler, it was great to catch up with you at the National Weather Association annual meeting, and look forward to just keeping in touch on this. And for everybody on the call that's looking to find out more about what Tyler does, we'll work with our Tower S team to either get in touch with you or maybe even send something out to everybody here today, as best as we were able to share some of these techniques and further this capability through the agency. Satellite Book Club continues each and every week. I already mentioned we got TJ next week talking about hailstorms, so maybe we can ask him if it left a scar in satellite imagery. In the meantime, feel free to get in touch with our Tower S team if you have any questions about the configuration of satellite products and AWIPs. Also, Emily dropped a link to the Satellite Book Club feedback form there. Always appreciate what you think about this. In the meantime, no, it's been a really active weather period. Appreciate everybody joining us today. Thanks in particular for those folks that joining us that were in the path of Helene. Obviously, some devastation there and some recovery. Going to take some time, but I also think some great services were provided from our agency. With that, wrap it up for today. Thanks everybody for being with us. Really appreciate it. Take care and see you next week. Bye all.